All right, fire away, go. All right, we're going to continue our look at Romans. Remember, Romans, again, if we know the history, Paul is talking to the northern kingdom within the Romans. He's not talking to the Romans. And specifically, he's not talking to the Christian church. Okay? A lot of people say, well, this was, the New Testament was written to the Christian church. The Christian church wasn't even in existence, basically. It wouldn't come into existence until around the 4th century. So Paul is teaching the fragments. Let's talk to Elohim, and we'll consider some things out of chapter 2 of Romans. Thank you, Father, for this time together. We ask that you'll open our eyes, our ears, and our hearts so we can see, hear, and understand what your word was saying then and how it applies to us today. And we thank you in the name of Yahushua. Amen. All right, so when we consider Paul, okay, and we looked at this kind of to recap what we talked about last week, when Paul is saying that he is a shlachim, he's an emissary separated to the Bazora of Yahuwah, when he's separated to proclaim the good news of Elohim. That word for separated again was parish. He was a Pharisee that was set aside for a single or particular purpose. That particular purpose was to go after the northern kingdom. Okay? Whereas the apostles in Jerusalem were ministering to the southern kingdom, Paul had the unique mission of going after the northern kingdom. So when we look at this, we look back at one of the events that took place with Yahushua when the 5,000 are seated and he tells Philip to feed them all, and Philip freaks out, and Peter, in all of his wonderful good sense, says, well, here's a little boy that has 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. Surely we can feed 5,000 people with that. And so Yahushua sits them down, and with the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes feeds the 5,000. Okay, so we have 5 loaves of bread, 5 books of Torah. We have 2 houses, or 2 fishes that represent 2 houses, the house of Judah and the house of Israel. What is brought back are the fragments, but it's the apostles that have to go out and grab the fragments and bring them back. And we have the Jerusalem council. We have the apostles in Jerusalem that are working on bringing back the fragments of Judah. Just because they were considered Jews, okay, just because they were part of those 2 tribes and what was left of Levite, okay, Levi, most likely the majority of Levites would have been slaughtered by Herod when he built his temple and replaced basically would have been the Zadok priesthood at this time, replaced them with his own puppets. But these apostles in Jerusalem are going after the southern kingdom. Just because they were Jews and Torah observant did not necessarily mean that they were Torah observant. Okay? Paul, on the other hand, is going after the northern kingdom. So they're all going out to bring back the fragments of those that are still adhering to Torah and are wanting to come back together. And we find in that event in with Yahushua that there's 12 baskets that are filled. So the 12 baskets will be, the 12 tribes will be reunited. There is a problem going on, however, that what's called the Yehudim, the Jews, or the let's just say the house of Judah, is really ragging hard on the house of Israel, saying you can't come back, you're an adulterous wife, you have to convert to Judaism, you have to go back and do the circumcision. And even today, if your mother is Catholic and your father is Jewish and can trace his lineage all the way back to Aaron, you're still Catholic. And you have to go through conversion, you have to go through the Beit Din, and if you're a male, even though you're already circumcised, you have to go see a mohel, and he has to draw blood. Okay, this is what Paul was fighting with. This was changed again, just kind of a recap. This change took place around 135-ish after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, when hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, however you want to look at it, of Jewish men were crucified by the Romans, which left the Jewish women. And they were raped or whatever, and now you're having children. Well, you can no longer tell the legitimacy of the father, so the rabbis in their wisdom said, okay, well, the genealogy is now based on the mother. Okay. In the Torah, even in Brit Hadashah, the genealogy is always based on the father. Okay, so that being said, the southern kingdom is really giving the northern kingdom a hard time about coming back. Paul has gone back and he is ministering to the northern kingdom to help them to understand that yes, you can come back regardless of what's being said. Yahusha paid the price for the two kingdoms to come back together. So we left off last week, just to recap, we left off with the last few verses of chapter 1 of Romans. And we go back to verse 24, again, says, Therefore Elohim gave them up to uncleanliness in the lust of their hearts, to disrespect their bodies amongst themselves, changed the truth of Elohim into the falsehood, and worshipped and served what was created rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. All right, so who does this refer to? Well, we could say, oh, well, that's the northern kingdom. They changed the rules. They set up golden calves in Bethel and Dan. They didn't want to be Torah observant. They ceased worshiping Yahuwah Elohim and began to worship Baal. So we could say that. But keep in mind also that from the time of the Maccabees up until this particular time right here, there's been a whole lot of things taking place in the southern kingdom as well. Torah observance went from Torah observance to whatever the scribes had to say, and the scribes became the Pharisees, and then the Pharisees became the rabbis. So they're not necessarily Torah observant anymore either. They become more halakha observant. Whatever the Pharisees have to say, that is what they do. And this is something that Yahusha was struggling with, these folks. He says, you don't pay any attention to the commandments of Elohim. You'd rather pay attention to the traditions of your elders. Okay? So with that, we go on and says, because of this, Elohim gave them over to degrading passions. For even their women exchange their natural relations for which is against nature. Likewise, the men also, having left natural relationships, burned in lust for one another, and even as they did not think worthwhile to possess the knowledge of Elohim, Elohim gave them over to a worthless mind to do what is improper. So, what is going on now with the northern kingdom? Paganism was rampant. Part of pagan worship was pagan prostitution or temple prostitution. Which temple prostitution was, it had no boundaries as to what went where. So this was something that was affecting what we would call the church. People called the church the assemblies of Elohim. And in Thyatira, we're going to read, when we read about Thyatira under Jezebel, this very thing is going on. In Thyatira, if you are not part of a union, well, you're not going to get any work. So Jezebel, we always look at her as that evil Jezebel and all this stuff. Jezebel was the epitome of that pastor that says, okay, it's okay to go ahead and do that because you can, it'll be all right. God understands the heart. Okay, so she was saying, go ahead and join the unions, it's okay. But if you joined the unions, then you had to be involved in temple pagan practices, because you still had to go to the union hall meetings, which involved this kind of thing. So this is mostly spoken to the northern kingdom. But think about this part, is that even if they did not think it worthwhile to possess the knowledge of Elohim, Elohim gave them over to a worthless mind to do what is improper. What does the prophet say about the people are destroyed because of what? Lack of knowledge. If I don't have a knowledge of Elohim, if I don't have a knowledge of His Word, then basically the kingdom uses the word reprobate. The word worthless is kind of makes more sense. That my religion overruns my relationship, and basically I'm like the many people who go to church or whatever that don't take the time to read it. They simply go by whatever the pastor says or whatever the minister says or the rabbi says, without taking any time to gain a knowledge of Elohim. If we do that, then whatever doctrine du jour happens to be the big thing, that's what they go with. Okay. This becomes very important in what we're about to read next. Again, we kind of went over this last week, but in order for us to kind of understand what we're going to talk about in chapter 2, we have to be on the same page. It says, and having been filled with all unrighteousness, and then it uses this word zanot. Fornication, prostitution, adultery, unfaithfulness to Elohim. Okay? Unrighteousness, then unfaithfulness to Elohim, and then wickedness, greed, evil, filled with envy, murder, fighting, deceit, evil habits, whisperers, slanderers, haters of Elohim, blah, 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 without discernment, covenant breakers, unloving, unforgiving, ruthless, who though they know the righteousness of Elohim, that those who practice such deserve death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. Now it becomes a serious thing, and this is something that we're going to look at in chapter 2. Zanot is something that we need to be aware of, though. We see this word quite a bit in Torah, and Paul refers to it quite a bit. Romans is one. He uses it in Timothy and a few other places. But zanot, fornication, prostitution, adultery, unfaithfulness to Elohim, kind of gives us the problem at hand. And it's a problem that even plagues us today. Okay? You have these 4 letters, okay? But within them, you have the nun and the vav. Okay? You have a nun. The first time we see nun as a root of a word in the Torah, it's in the word nefesh. That means soul. Okay? Vav is the 6th letter of the alphabet that represents our flesh, our physical side. And they are surrounded by something that represents the word, the protection, nourishment, rest that comes from Elohim. And then on the other side, the covenant that comes from Elohim. Okay? But there's a turmoil always that's going on within both tribes. In the southern tribe, they were struggling with the Torah observance versus the traditions of the elders, getting back to observing the Torah. And on the northern kingdom side, well, you have folks that want to observe the Torah, want to come back to Elohim, want to come back to be able to worship at the temple, but are being denied this by the authorities of the southern kingdom. So for us today, when we consider this, our spiritual side and our carnal side are always at war with one another. Okay? Concerning what the word and the covenant is. Because we want to have the word, we want to have the covenant, but we're always struggling with what is actually what we should do, what we should not do, what is other people doing, why can't I do what other people are doing, what they're doing is totally okay, I should be able to get involved in that just fine. So when we think about that, we look at the first verse in chapter 2. It says, "Therefore, O man, you are without excuse. Everyone who judges, for in which you judge another, you condemn yourself, since you who judge practice the same." Now, it doesn't say O ish. It says O ha'adam. So it's talking to men and women. It's not singling things out. In fact, we're going to find in these verses in chapter 2, it says that Elohim is no respecter of persons. Okay? He doesn't say this is for guys and girls are excluded from this. Adam, ha'adam, included all of us. Okay? So, therefore, O Adam, you're without excuse. Okay? We don't have an excuse. Why do we not have an excuse? Why today especially do we not have an excuse? Because we have the word of Elohim at our disposal to read. Why would they not have an excuse? Because they also had the Torah available for them to be ministered to. Paul was teaching them Torah. The apostles were teaching them Torah. So there's no excuse for not understanding what it actually says. But you're practicing the same thing you're condemning other people for practicing. And an example of this we have happens between Peter and Paul. That Peter goes to visit Paul, and he's hanging out with the Gentiles, and he's having a good old time, but as soon as some people from the Jerusalem council come, he kind of backs off, and he starts to be condescending towards the northern kingdom. And Paul gets onto him and says, what? These Yehudi come here, and now you don't want to have anything to do with us because you're afraid you might upset them? Okay? We can't have a double standard. Okay? The Torah is the Torah. So we know that the judgment of Elohim is according to the truth against those who practice such. The judgment of Elohim is according to the truth against those who practice such. What are they practicing? They're practicing things that go contrary to Torah. What has the authority to judge that? Paul is telling us that the truth is what will judge that. And where do we find the truth? Well, we find the truth within the word of Elohim. We're not going to find the truth within the dogma of the Council of Nicaea or the Second Council of Nicaea or any of the, I can never say it right, ecumenical councils. Or we're not going to find it from what the Great Assembly decided at Yavne or what the Pharisees decided. The truth is within the Word itself. Okay, so if we can find our way to the Word itself, then we can begin to walk the way we're supposed to be walking. I'm going to skip all the way to verse 14 of chapter 2, and then we'll come back, because verse 14 and 15 are very important. I asked a question, I think, a couple of weeks ago, where was the Torah written? Or where was the Torah given? I'm sorry, where was the Torah given? Was it given in Israel? The answer is no, it was not given in Israel. It was given outside of Israel. Who were the people that received it? Well, the people that received the Torah were the Gentiles, but it also refers to the Ger. Okay? The Goyim, or not the Goyim, the Ger, the Gentile, the stranger that resides among them. The Torah was given to the world. It was not given to one set of people. Okay? Now, that being said, the children of Israel and those that received the Torah there along with them had a responsibility to take it to the world. But as we see what happens through Exodus and then into Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, and finally when we get into Joshua and Judges, we see that it totally fell apart. Okay? And everybody went their own way. So when we look at 14, it says, "For when Gentiles who do not have the Torah by nature do what is in the Torah, although not having the Torah, they are a Torah to themselves, who show the work of the Torah written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and between themselves their thoughts accusing or even being accused." Okay? "In the same day when Yahuwah shall judge in the secrets of men, through Yahushua HaMashiach, according to my Bezorah, Okay? Then it says to the Yehudi first and then to the Aramean. Okay, so it is going to include the Yehudi and the Aramean. Aramean becomes a very important word. It's a word that's kind of was lost after the Aramaic scriptures went away. But the Arameans were the Aramaic-speaking peoples. And who were these Aramaic-speaking peoples? Well, Jerusalem, they spoke Aramaic. But everyone who came out of captivity also spoke Aramaic. So it would include the other tribes of the northern kingdom. But when the Gentiles who do not have the Torah by nature do what is in the Torah, although not having the Torah, they are a Torah to themselves. He's talking to the northern kingdom. Okay? They have the Torah. They have the instruction of Elohim. They want to live according to the instruction of Elohim. They are prohibited from fully embracing it because they're not allowed back into the social club, but they become a Torah to themselves. Okay? They possess that knowledge, and they're trying to build that relationship based on it. The work of the Torah is written in their hearts. Is there somewhere in the prophets that we actually read that I will put my word within their hearts? Anybody recall a certain prophet that has this to say? Jeremiah. Okay. All right. So it begins. How does this apply to us? My relationship with my Elohim is based on my perception of what this says. But simply my perception of what it says is not always going to have me doing what it says. For the Torah to be written within my heart, I also have to have the spiritual connection necessary for that relationship to take place. Well, what had happened by this time, about 5, 6, 7 years prior to this, what had happened was that the Ruach came back. Okay, the very spirit of Yahuwah Elohim came back and inhabited humankind. The connection could be had. Yahusha made it possible. So now I can have the Torah within my heart. I can have it in my head. I can read it every day. But the application comes when the Spirit shows me how to apply it. And it shows me how to have discernment between what someone says I should do as opposed to what Elohim has to do. And this, we go down a little, well, we go down to the next page, I think. It talks about, for circumcision indeed profits if you practice the Torah, but if you are a transgressor of the Torah, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. That's verse 25. So if an uncircumcised one watches over the righteousness of the Torah, shall not his uncircumcision be reckoned also as circumcision? This is verse 26, and the word that's used for watches over is yishamar. Yishamar. The person who guards, treasures, preserves, observes, cares about what that instruction says is the one who is walking in the real circumcision. Okay, we get all hung up on the physical circumcision. Some people, yeah, that's really an important thing. You have to be circumcised in order to be part of the covenant people and all this other stuff. But Paul is pointing out, and he's pointing this out for a reason, I guess, that the southern kingdom is really pushing circumcision, although these people are already circumcised. He's telling them that if circumcision profits you in practice of the Torah, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. Or if indeed profits if you practice the Torah, but if you are a transgressor of the Torah, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. And if an uncircumcised one watches over the righteousness of the Torah, so not that uncircumcision be circumcision. I mean, take that word circumcision and toss it out and put covenant in its place. Okay? If someone who claims to be in covenant practices unrighteousness, then they are not in covenant. But if someone who is said to be out of covenant is the one who is practicing and shamar, observing, preserving, treasuring, guarding, treasuring what the Torah says, then that person is in covenant regardless of what anyone has to say. It's a very important message to the northern kingdom, who are being told, no, you can't become part of the social club until you jump through the hoops of going through conversion, and then you have to sit at the Beit Din, where there's going to be, I think it's funny, there's going to be an Orthodox rabbi, there's going to be a conservative rabbi, and a Reform rabbi, and you have to make all three of them happy. Okay, it's kind of like the joke, you know, there's going to be a priest, a Baptist minister, and a rabbi there, but you have to make all these people happy in order for you to be in covenant. Is that true? Yeah, it's no more true for us today than it was for the northern kingdom back then. Now this is what Paul is really, really pushing, is if you're doing the same thing that these people who transgress the Torah are doing, then you're no better than them. But if they are doing the same thing that the people that are transgressing the Torah are doing, and they are condemning you because you supposedly transgress the Torah, they're the ones that are transgressing the Torah. They're the ones that are going to be responsible to Elohim. You keep doing what you're doing, because even though they're saying that you're not in covenant, you are in covenant. That goes for all of us. Okay? There are people who are going to say that, oh, you're not doing what whatever denomination or whatever says you should be doing. I see this a lot with the Hispanic congregations. I got a kick out of it when one of the directors asked the pastor there, because the pastor told him that I was teaching their youth class. Well, he's not teaching them heresy, is he? And kind of got upset. I don't know why, but I said, no, I'm not teaching any of the doctrines of said denomination. I won't mention the denomination. That didn't go over too well. But you know, people will consider it heresy if you go contrary to their denomination. Same thing that they were fighting back here. It was heresy to go contrary to the traditions of the elders, because we have this struggle in here that I want to be in charge, and being in charge is what I end up writing on here, regardless of what these two other factors have to be. And this is something that we see in the story of Lazarus and the rich man, and how it transcends itself over to the raising of Lazarus. The rich man is crying over to Lazarus, or to Abraham, send Lazarus back and have him tell my brothers. And Abraham says, no, he can't cross back over. And even if he were to go back over, they wouldn't listen to anything he has to say. So we get that story in Luke, and then we go and we see Lazarus being raised in John. And what happens when Lazarus is raised? It doesn't affect the religious authority. In fact, the religious authority, instead of seeing it and understanding it, they actually plot to not only kill Yahusha, but now they want to kill Lazarus as well. And why do they want to kill Yahusha and Lazarus? They say that the Romans are going to come and they're going to take away our power, and they're going to kill the people, but they're going to take away our power. They're going to take away our authority. They're going to affect our wealth. They're going to affect our position, and whatever it's going to do to the people. But it's going to hurt us. Okay, so it's going to hurt me, my greatness. And this is something that Paul is fighting against. Is the same thing that Yahushua was battling, is Paul is battling. The same thing that many of us battle today is what Paul was battling. Is that I'm striving to have a relationship with my Elohim based on His Word. I'm struggling to have His Word written within my heart, and I'm struggling to live within the covenant according to His Word. I want to shema. I want to be able to perceive, discern, understand, obey, apply, and be content in what the Word says. And then I want to be able to shamar. I want to be able to preserve, guard, treasure, and observe what the Word says in my life. But it goes contrary to a whole bunch of things. So I do exactly